And this is an interesting one. It seems to be that there's some semi-reasonable arguments that the parents have made. I mean, there's quite a few glaring issues here, obviously, that you've pointed out, where, especially with that math paper, I mean, I completely agree with everything you're
Yeah.
saying. But there are, I think, other cases out there more historically, and I'm sure we'll have them in the future as well, where the parents were far more ignorant than even this. And I'm going to guess that regardless of what happens here, especially if there's a not guilty or a hung jury, and we're recording this prior to the verdict coming out, I should note. So depending on when you're watching this, but if this doesn't happen here, I imagine it's only a matter of time before one of these cases does get tried with far more ignorant parents, and that precedent is set at some point. And then I guess the question is, do we go back in time? Do we go look at all of the cases where these sort of things happen, or does this only affect cases going forward where a child goes out and shoots up the school, or do we go back years and years and years and look at all those cases where the parents were ignorant? Can you go back in time if this isn't and has it wasn't law at that point in time, or wasn't had a verdict determined on it by that point in time?
It's a fascinating question. Somebody actually brought up that exact question during my lives. I was live streaming them reading the jury instructions, which if you're a trial observer and those bore you, they are the absolute most important thing that happens during a trial are
Yeah.
the jury instructions. And somebody asked that exact question. Can they go back on some of the older school shootings? And the question becomes it depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on what statute they're trying to bring them under, because much like in civil cases, there are statute of limitations in which, the state could be barred from bringing them. Like in Illinois, there's no statute of limitations on homicide.
Hmm.
They can bring it. Involuntary manslaughter falls under the homicide statute. Up in Michigan, I can't speak to every state because I
Yeah.
don't know the law in every state, but I would hazard to guess that in most states, involuntary manslaughter probably won't have a statute of limitations on it, meaning
Hmm.
that in theory, yeah, they could go back if they so chose to
Hmm.
do it, to try to prosecute some of these parents. And like moving forward, because I posed a couple of questions on my Twitter, which is defense_diaries. Y'all should follow it. It's a pretty good Twitter account. Um, I had somebody bring up the possibility of what about parents of gang members
Mm.
who know that their kids are gang members, who know that they're involved in violence at some points. Are those parents now going to be potentially charged for not stopping their child from being in a gang? I mean,
Yeah.
it expands the thought process a lot. And like another interesting hypothetical that was presented to me was, well, let's substitute in this situation. Everything else is the same. Everything is the same. All the evidence is the same. But instead of buying him a gun, they got him a car for him to use. And instead of him shooting his classmates in school, he waited until after school and then took the vehicle and plowed into a crowd of his classmates. But everything else, and,
Yeah.
and the question was, do they charge the parents for that? Because that kind of hyper focuses it on the gun issue.
Sure.
Like there's it's that socio-political thing that we're talking about where big Second Amendment folks see as an attack on guns, and they see it as, look, this is a way that they're trying to you know chip away at our Second Amendment rights
Hmm.
by making it, where parents can be held responsible for their kids' actions outside of their presence. And it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
It is. Like, would they have even tried to charge him if he had done it with a vehicle that they had just bought him 4 days earlier?
Well, and
Knowing what they
yeah.
knew,
It-
still get the paper, did he get the test?
yeah.
Instead of a gun, he's drawn a car
Yeah.
with kids flying over the car. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. Well, and here's another interesting thought too, that we want to legislate this. We don't want these sort of things to happen. We're like, okay, well, we're gonna put something in place so the parents are going to be held more responsible and accountable for this sort of stuff. Okay, great. Well, what things are you then putting in place to help parents who are in this situation? Because
Right.
there's thousands of parents out there, who millions, who are in this a situation with a troubled teenager who needs serious help. And
Right.
what resources do those parents have? That's
Right.
a huge question, because in most
Huge.
cases the answer is nothing. There is nothing
Zero.
for them. Yeah.
Zero.
So
Like
how are they
most of
what are they
our
supposed to do?
right, most of our country lives at the medium income level or below.
Yeah.
They don't have the resources. If you've got single parents that are struggling to survive, that are working constantly, you've got the
Yeah.
working poor out there who who are clearly not going to be able to spend the amount of time that would be expected typically with their kids, or that what you would hope for,
Yeah.
'cause they're having to work so they can provide shelter and food, so they're just not there
Yeah.
in the way that we would want parents to be with their kids. Yeah, man, it's like all
Yeah.
those things are
So if we're
such
gonna
big
yeah,
factors, man.
if we're gonna legislate it, fine. But then the resources need to be there for those parents who are in that situation. It's not just, well, you should talk to them more or tell
Right,
them, because it's not gonna go anywhere. If the kid's
right,
deranged and needs help and needs to go, but they can't afford it, there's no place to take them. Because it's not as simple as, oh, we'll just take them to a mental hospital. That's not how our system works. You can go
no,
get them in a hold
exactly.
for a little bit, but they're going to get out soon. And unless you have tons and tons and tons of money to let them go there and be in some sort of a treatment, and then number one, assume that they're going to be able to stay in that treatment and not get kicked out of that hospital, and then be like, well, where do we take them now? Because that's
Right.
another big factor in a lot of this stuff. It's like, well, let's legislate it, but what's our plan to actually execute it? And that's
Right.
the other crazy part of this.
It is, and it becomes that then becomes a political football
Yep.
where people, because to pay for those programs, to put those in place, it's the taxpayers. They're coming to us to pay for it. So the people that are not big on social programs and don't want to have to pay their hard-earned money
Hmm.
to help society at large are going to say no.
Yeah.
Like no, like let the government pay for it. Well, the government pays for it through taxes,
That's how
So
that
I mean,
works.
it's like
Yeah.
it's like that vicious cycle that
Well, if we, and this goes way back in time, we were kids, but there was state hospitals. I mean, there still are technically, but they're not what they once were.
right,
And we got rid of those in the 80s. And you know what happened after that? Explosion of homelessness. The reason we have the homeless problem we do today is because we don't have state hospitals. It was thought on a local level that we're going to move it all there. The local communities are going to handle this on their own. And guess what? The local communities have no money to handle it on their own. So they
right.
don't, or they have very minimal programs for these sort of individuals that are all mentally ill that need help. But what
Yes,
happens? They're on the streets. That's
that's it,
that's what
man.
we have, and that's because we had this idea of, we don't need this, we didn't need this. This is too much money, but we'll have the locals handle it. But they don't, and
They
it
can't.
would be the same sort of thing. It would be the same sort of domino effect. That sounds great. We're going to make it stricter, but we're going to have nothing in place to actually
Right.
execute.
It's got no teeth.
Exactly.
It's like it's implausible because
Yep.
the money's not there to do it.
Exactly.
And, and then you start bleeding into all the people that are out there without insurance, health
Yeah.
insurance. Like you don't have health insurance, it goes right to what you were saying. Where do I come up with the money to get my kid inpatient for
Yeah.
any extended period of time to get the treatment that they need?
Or even
They don't
even
have
even
it, and if
even
they
if
don't have
there is,
insurance,
even if you have the money half the time, well, we can get them in here in about 7 months. Not
right? We don't have a
exactly.
bed.
Yeah, it doesn't really work in mental health emergencies.
It doesn't, man. It's like, yeah, it's a thing, man. It really is. And it's like there is no clear-cut answer, especially in a country which is so divided
Yeah.
about how they feel about what the government should be involved in and what they shouldn't. Big government, small government, taxes, no tax. I mean, it's like we're just very divided as a country to where there's never going to be a clear-cut answer to it, and that piece of legislation gets booted back and forth, It passes through the House and gets to the Senate, and the Senate's like, no, because whoever has the majority in that particular election cycle, if it's conservatives, and they're like, no, we don't want to pay for it.
Hmm.
The people need to deal with it on their own. Parent better, pay more attention to your kid, which of course doesn't take into consideration the working poor. I mean, in a capitalist society, the fact of the matter is you're always going to have poor people.
Hmm.
That's how capitalism works. There's always going to be the one percenters.
Yep.
Then the rest of us all fighting for the rest of the money to
Yeah.
try to live. That's how the system works.
Yeah. No clear cut answers to any of this. Just it seems
No,
more more roadblocks down the road, no matter what happens.
100%.
Hey, it's Tony Brueski. If you like the podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and press that bell so you don't miss any of our updates on the cases we're following for you right here at the Hidden Killers podcast from True Crime Today. And thanks